Hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the webinar. Today, Positive Luxuries co-founder and CEO Diana Verde Nieto is joined by Bain Company's partner, Jenny Davis-Peccoud, to discuss the key takeaways from COP26 and what they mean for the luxury industry. In this session, we will reflect on the big winners and losers from the conference, the future of legislation, and the action luxury brands, suppliers, and retailers can take now. This webinar will be 45 minutes, including 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions anytime during the webinar for the panel. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us today. How are you?
Yes, very good, Diana. It's really nice to be able to join you and this group. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, me too. And I mean, this year has been a very unusual COP because for the first time in history, actually businesses has been actually to join the table. So normally COP is a feast of government and NGOs, but this time it felt a little bit more like Davos, I must admit. So although COP26 perhaps was not the success we all hope, in terms of firm commitments and a very clear roadmap, but I think what we have had is we have reached to some kind of agreements, and we move from some pledges to actually actions. So I think for me, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to have your thoughts on this, but some of the highlights has been like, methane has been part of the agenda, and I think it was 105 countries agreed to cut emissions by 30% by 2030, and forestry also got into the agenda in which governments have agreed to preserve not just forests, but also terrestrial ecosystems and accelerating restoration in terms of ending deforestation by 2030. I think this is a great success for nature and for all of us, actually. And when you think about that, only 5% of people actually protect 85% of our planet in terms of biodiversity. This is a great win. So what we need now is very simple. We need to backfill all the commitments and promises so they're not empty and we actually get to them, and then involve the private sector to accelerate the actions that government have promised to take. So, I mean, Jenny, what was your experience at COP, and what do you think about the outcomes?
Yeah, so I think you've hit on a number of highlights, Diana, but firstly, just to say, it did very much feel like the first time that business was meaningfully at the table. We were at a COP probably 3 years ago, and it was very much NGO and kind of government negotiator focused. And this time it really felt like there was a meaningful business contingent, both inside the blue zone as well as outside. So very much like a Davos in that sense. And I think because of that, it's easy to feel the optimism and engagement and enthusiasm. Now, certainly a lot of very big commitments came out from the government side of things. I think over 100 countries did update their nationally determined contributions, and they did start to kink the curve, not as much as we would hope to get to a 1.5 degree pathway, but important progress. There was some very big breakthroughs right at the end around some of the mechanisms. Article 6 around carbon markets and carbon credits is going to be a very important marker for that piece of the agenda going forward. And then just as you say, so many big commitments around methane, deforestation, coal use, et cetera, that came through. Not everybody was on board with those. Sometimes it was as notable who was absent as who was signing, but some important progress. Also because it stopped kind of from talking about what are the targets overall to actually what are the specific levers that we're going to pull to make it happen. So that was very exciting. Business at the table, some great progress on the regulatory side. And the final thing I would highlight is this, finance also was very much in the room and at the party. So the Global Financial Alliance towards Net Zero, GFANZ, getting hundreds of trillions of assets to commit to support a net zero pathway, the introduction of the Sustainability Standards Board, which will help businesses certainly get to grips with the whole raft of ways that they're asked to report on sustainability at the moment, and other engagements. So that felt like very good progress. That said, I definitely don't want to be just starry-eyed optimism, because we all know that making the commitments is the easy part, and actually delivering on the commitments is what's really difficult. And so essentially the work starts now, coming out of COP.
I totally agree. And it's basically how we actually put some really good roadmaps to be able to backfill all those commitments. Otherwise, we will all have failed. So, I mean, I like to kind of hone in a little bit of this finance piece, because obviously this famous 100 billion commitment for financial adaptation has been lingering since Paris without a firm action plan, and still we don't have a firm action plan. But I think that this time, because businesses has been on the table, there is now a little bit of a different focus in terms of how can business help adapt the global south to this development of, to be able to get to a much more meaningful development. And this means, in terms of low-hanging fruit, is just basically thinking about energy in a slightly different way, perhaps with investment on renewables. And this obviously requires a completely new set of language. So we need to move from supply chains to value chains. We need to move from suppliers to partners, and actually internalize those value chains that very much has lived outside companies' remit and impact, all about Scope 3. Now, internalize that and actually make this part of our family. So, I mean, for where we sit, we see luxury with a great appetite to actually be much more mindful in terms of material choices, in terms of regenerative agriculture, a lot more focus on innovation. I mean, how do you see the private sector acting towards that? And do you think that there is a role that the private sector can play to help the global south to adapt to this transition towards a low carbon economy?
Yeah, for sure. Of course, it's not just the role of business, but business will have an important role to play. I think one of the either disappointments or misalignments coming out of COP was around, for example, the loss and damage that a number of the kind of developing nations were looking for a standalone fund as an example to help for mitigation and adaptation, and that isn't where they got to. And so that's something that the Global South will continue to struggle in the face of the government commitments. That said, businesses very much are being sensitive to the fact that this isn't just something within their four walls. It's something that they actually need to take on in their extended supply chains. And so the deforestation pledge from the governments, for example, which will set a very good framework for that, it's really businesses that are going to have to mobilize to ensure that their supply chains are not reaching back into the Amazon or into Indonesia or other places and driving deforestation for the inputs that are used in fashion, for example, around leather or palm oil or other ingredients. And so businesses will certainly need to spend a lot more time thinking carefully about where their supply chains are reaching and how do they ensure that what they're buying to go into these products that we all use every day is not actually causing the damage that we need to end in order to deliver on the climate commitments.
Absolutely. I mean, Unilever has actually published the fact that they are committing to net zero palm oil by 2030 to 20 or 2039, I can't quite remember. It's 10 years difference, obviously. But I mean, the fact that they are committing to no palm oil is a massive, massive, I guess, step in the right direction. Did you have any kind of aha moments while you were there?
Yeah, so I think maybe just to share too, there was a panel hosted by the New York Times, which was all about greenwashing. And it was fascinating to hear. It was the CEO of Patagonia, the executive director of Greenpeace International, and the head of the hedge fund Engine One that was responsible for getting board directors on climate sympathetic board directors onto Exxon. And that was really an aha moment for me, because the hedge fund executive was just so compelling about why this is critical for the future of Exxon, not because it's kind of a do good and we have to care about the world kind of thing, but this is at the heart of this business, the risks that we're running, the financial value that's at stake, and really wanting investors holding these companies to account. And you just thought, wow, that's really powerful if we can have that sort of just clear-headed business orientation around these issues. I think that was one of the aha moments that I had. The second one is really more around what was missing, because we didn't hear as much about consumers and consumer engagement. Civil society was present in the form of the demonstrators who were bringing their voices, which I think do make a difference for the executives and negotiators, but not a lot of question about what consumers are going to need to do to help support by way of changing our behaviors and how we hold our brands and our products to account. And that just says to me there's more work that has to come for all of the companies that are bringing products to consumers. How do we make it work?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, just picking up regarding boards and the duties of institutions, I think that there has been all sorts of different type of makeup of institutions, from kind of limited businesses and B Corps and stuff. I think we just need right now one single model, and actually this model have to have that accountability. I don't think that we have the time right now to have all this divisive. We need to just have one real single model, and I think that is the traditional model of institution with or companies with a huge strong board, and like you said, that needs to be audited, that needs to be engaged, and that needs to change in order to actually get the adaptation that we need towards climate. I mean, for me, the aha moment was the fact that, this is a massive tanker and we only have 8 years really to move to a mid pathway. And only by collaboration, really, and putting sustainability as a pre-competitive, we can really change and actually get to where we have to go. And I am truly convinced that the sustainability revolution is going to be as fast as the industrial revolution, so as fast as the digital revolution, as transformational as the industrial revolution, but only if we actually work together. I mean, did you have the same feeling? Did you have this kind of excitement when you were there?
Yeah. So there is a lot of excitement about working together, and you could see it just in some of the announcements that came out, even from businesses. For example, the 5 big grocery retailers in the UK announcing their collaboration with the World Wildlife Federation. The global agribusiness large companies also came out with their commitments to work collaboratively together. And so you could sense and feel this, as you say, excitement around also a bit of trepidation, if you will, around working together and how do you really pull that off. I might, though, have a slightly different view on the balance, though, between pre-competitive versus competitive motions in this space and what's really going to move the dial. And I would say that the pre-competitive piece is going to be extremely helpful to lay a foundation and get some common standards and common approaches, data, tools, tracking, et cetera, to get some of the noise out of the system. But I still believe that actually the more that companies truly see this as core to their competitive success, that's where you're going to get companies truly outdoing each other and bringing those products, bringing those services to the market. And so for me, I love the pre-competitive stuff. I don't want that to be where it stops or where the focus shifts, because what you really have to do is shift the full company. And those are people who are out there fighting and winning in the marketplace every day. We need them thinking about how sustainability can help them do that. And that's the piece that was slightly missing, and that I'm hoping in the next year or two, there's much more focus on that piece of it, because that's where I think you really get the multiplier effect.
I actually agree with you. I mean, pre-competitive is needed to actually lay the foundations, which is where we are now. But I could not agree with you more in terms of we need the fire of the commercial world to actually see how we can actually outdo each other. Because otherwise, you know, everybody talks about sustainability, but I think the real winners are the ones who will act upon their promises. I don't know what you're feeling about that, because it's so much pledges, so much commitments, but I'm kind of bored of it. I just want to see action. what do you see when you sit?
No, I agree. I guess this is a little bit of what was sobering for me coming out of Glasgow, is that in our consulting work, we know just how few big transformations succeed. And actually on the sustainability front, it's only 7% of sustainability transformations that achieve the goals that they have set. So we're all setting these amazing, ambitious targets. It's really energizing and exciting, but only 7% succeed in achieving those. And so I completely agree, Diana, that the trick is how do you move from those commitments into the actions that are really going to happen. And that's why I say that it really has to be getting the whole organization understanding how this becomes an accelerator for the business that we're doing every day. That's where you start to see it convert into action, where you start to say, oh, reducing carbon will help me take out cost, or will help me build a more resilient supply chain because I understand my suppliers and their sustainability commitments. Actually, that has tremendous value also for me in supply chain resilience. And so it becomes, sustainability becomes part of how we do business, instead of something that the CEO has announced in Glasgow and the sustainability team is off working on somewhere else. It needs to become how we win in the market and in our day-to-day activities.
Absolutely. And the work that you do, we complemented by actually assessing companies and ensuring that all those pledges and commitment are actually truly embedded into the business, and how you actually achieve that transformation from from moving every part of the organization to be aligned and have a common goal, which is being, moving the organization to a different place.
Yeah.
But I think I sometimes feel that sustainability is a little bit like, 1st of January when you make your commitments, I'm going to go to the gym every single day. And then you start really enthusiastically, and then somehow something happened that falls through the sideway. I mean, this year, I think that we can't actually afford that. And I really hope that CEOs and people that are listening today really take this quite on board and really, internalize these changes. So Jenny, I am mindful that we don't have much time, and you always have been amazing, an incredible conversation partner to me and to many people about advice. And your wisdom is incredible. So what are, maybe not the one, but the few, the few things that big and small companies should start thinking about or start doing, which are low-hanging fruit, and what are the slightly more complicated things that they should start thinking about in putting, the money where their mouth is, to really get us to where we need to go, not just themselves to achieve the competitive advantage to win, but also to get the entire world towards this 1.5 degrees pathway.
Yeah. So look, I know we're all bored of the commitments, but I guess what I would say, if your company hasn't yet made a series of bold commitments, that does have to be the first place to start, because time and again we see that the bolder the commitment, the greater the spur to action. Then, if you really take that seriously, so make sure that you're clear. Just get your commitments and put them out there. I think the second piece of advice that I would have is sustainability is a very big field, and it's got climate and water and waste and human rights and living wages and nature destruction. And in some ways, companies have to act on all of them. But if you act on all, you don't actually really make a big difference in a few. And so one thing that we encourage companies to do is think about what we would call base notes and high notes. And the base notes is the set of broad things that you have to do across all different kinds of areas. But the high notes are the ones that are really going to make you sing in terms of your impact in the world. And you can only have a very few high notes. And so it may be you're doing lots of stuff on carbon and waste and water, but your real high note is what you're doing with your farmers around living income and thriving communities, as an example. And being conscious of where you are, where you're trying to build those high notes is something which can just help bring tremendous focus to the organization and the sustainability agenda. And I guess the final piece of advice that I would say is one of the things that can stop sustainability efforts from being as successful as they need to be is what we call the hourglass effect. The senior people are super engaged. The younger staff are really excited. And somehow it gets trapped in the middle of the hourglass as you're trying to get it through, because the middle managers are trying to hit their numbers and achieve all their other objectives, and here's something else that you're throwing in. And really thinking about how you widen the hourglass. And that can come in a number of ways. One is actually just tying it to objectives and incentives. It actually is providing people with tools that makes it easy for them to make business decisions around sustainability. But there's also something really powerful about unleashing the more junior members of the company to think that different way, that creative way, and connect them to the senior executives. So break the silos and the hierarchies that can get in the way of things, and really unleash energy in a way that makes them very productive. So I think transcending the hourglass effect is also something important.
Absolutely. And I mean, working with a team with a lot of millennials and Jay-Zs, I hope they're not listening. I mean, they are incredibly challenging, ask the most difficult, sometimes between brackets, annoying questions. But it's great to have them on board because they make you think differently. And actually, if you give them fertile ground to come up with ideas and to listen to their ideas, definitely can take the organization forward. I mean, it's one of the biggest probably privilege that as a CEO, as a co-CEO I have, is to work with young people that actually can bring all that energy and the innovation, because they see the world in such a different way. And if you are open enough to allow them to challenge you, it's amazing what you can get out of those conversations. So Jenny, we have questions from the audience, and if you haven't asked yet your questions, please pop them in the chat. So we'll, not in particular order, This is from Alina. I can't really see. I'm sorry. Will there be any chance to textiles recycling or recycling mandates? Do you know if?
Yeah. So look, just like every other material, textiles are very in the microscope to see if we can do something more meaningful around textile recycling. Now, Diana, you may be more up than I am on some of the specific technologies there, but certainly there's a number of interesting experiments. One around the fibers themselves, and can you actually create more circular products, if you will, by reclaiming and recycling and reusing the fibers. The other thing that we're seeing, though, is also a number of experiments around different business models, such that you don't actually have to decompose the garment and recompose the garment. You actually make it much more garment as a service. And you start to see that at high-end luxury, for example, where you can have rental models or leasing models or dress as a service type model that you can create. So as you think about some of the future of circular for luxury, some of it might be around making more circular products. A lot of it could also be around making more circular business models. That mean that we don't have to wind up either burning clothes at the end of their life or only having them used just a very few times. So I think that's going to be an interesting space to watch around textiles and other components for the luxury and fashion world.
I mean, yes, Jenny, and I don't know if you remember that we did a report with Bain, actually, with some of your team at the luxury division, so we can put it in the chat, and if you have not read it, please feel free to download it. It's great, it's very interesting, and actually perhaps fill some of the gaps that Jenny just said. There is a question here that says, what can luxury concretely do? So what are the advice that you will give to luxury business?
Yeah, so look, luxury it's a very interesting business because it spans from the poorest to the richest in the world, particularly at the higher end of luxury. I think concretely there's a whole series of things that a luxury company can do. A lot of them is really around getting to grips with your supply chain and really understanding where are your materials coming from, and is that somewhere that you'd be proud to have them come from? When you understand what goes into making, whether it's the cashmere or the leather or any of the metals or other cotton or other materials that you're using, where are you getting them from? Do you even know where that's coming from? And so I think the first thing is to really get to grips with your supply chain. And it can feel overwhelming because it's hard to unpick. But that's really where you are going to have the biggest ability to impact and setting some standards and some commitments of how you actually are sourcing your materials and treating the people and the places that are involved in your supply chain. Some of the easier first steps will certainly be around packaging, as an example, and looking at, if you're looking at more of the kind of beauty side of the business, all of the packaging, whether it's plastic, glass, metal, what actually are you doing with that? Are you using too much? And if you look sometimes at the beauty kits that you can buy at Christmas for gifts or whatever, and you just think, wow, there's like a small bottle in here in a very big box, and do we really need all of that? And so I think that's something else to look at. And then the final thing that you can look at concretely is actually, what is the message that you're giving to your consumers and your target audiences? And is it a message which is encouraging consumption and encouraging encouraging sustainability, or is it encouraging or not saying anything about it? And sometimes the platform that you can build, depending on your brand, you can have a very big influence on how people think and act. in this space.
I mean, you have said it all, but there is probably one or two things I'd like to add. One is leadership. So, I mean, luxury ought to lead the way in this conversation, and that comes with transparency, which you already mentioned. And I think in beauty, for example, is an area in which understanding where your raw materials come from and actually giving back to those communities in which the raw materials are coming from and developing those communities is massively important. And also investing in more sustainable ways of agriculture, either regenerative, or perhaps thinking about where you perhaps are better off to move into something like biomimicry, where you are much more mindful about the impact of your raw materials for beauty and fragrances, for example, as well as obviously fashion. But I think leadership is very important for this industry to lead the way. So, there is no excuse, really. It's just the best of the best. We have to lead the way. So here is, how does a mid-sized company look to hope to affect a global Scope 3 value chain and make it more sustainable? So this is a challenge. So when you're mid-sized, how you can actually influence that Scope 3 with your suppliers?
Yeah, now obviously it's hard to answer this in general. It depends, for example, if you're a premium niche player, if you're an insurgent, or if you're more of a which markets you're targeting. But just to give you an example, and this is in a very different industry, but with very similar issues, in the chocolate industry. Now, chocolate is not the same as perfume, but it does have a lot of the same supply chain challenges reaching back into the global south and farmers, et cetera. And there's an insurgent player, very small here in the Netherlands, where I'm based, which actually has created some proprietary supply chains because they very much want to offer, it's called Tony's Chocolate Only, they very much want to offer slave-free chocolate. So they've partnered with some of the cocoa and chocolate providers to create proprietary supply chains. Now, that can work if you have a premium price that can absorb some of that early on. But where they've gone now is actually, if you're a small player, you've got to get big players involved. And so then you can think about, do you do that on your own, or can there be a coalition of players that you can actually band together with to get greater size and scale that can then you all jointly benefit from the investments that you're making upstream in the supply chain. So I think there, depending on your size and your market niche, you can figure out, can you go it alone at first and use this as a premium advantage, or do you need to actually find scale in numbers by partnering up with either a big guy or some collection of mid-sized players to really help you get there?
Absolutely. And that is something that we obviously help companies to do. So together we're stronger. So, I mean, a follow-up question with that. What branches, areas in the manufacturing industry and suppliers are currently the hardest to bring on board regarding sustainability, in your experience, Jenny?
So say that one more time. Which branches of...
in the manufacturing industries and suppliers are currently the hardest to bring on board regarding sustainability?
Oh, yeah, look, I think there are some challenges by region, frankly, more so than industry. And depending on which region of the world you're either based in or servicing, you actually will find it easier or harder. I think sometimes the challenge can be if you are a company that is selling into the more developed markets in Europe or the US, but your supply chains extend into Asia or into the global south, you actually may find it harder to fully kind of operationalize the sustainability promises on the back end that all of your consumers are looking for on the front end. And so those are some of the big challenges for companies from a regional perspective. Now, some industries are harder versus easier to deal with. I saw a question in the chat about furniture and steel, for example, and steel is quite hard to decarbonize at the moment. And so there are technical solutions that people are looking to bring in, but that's really going to come from technological breakthroughs, and then finding ways to scale those to down the cost curve to get to a premium, to get to a cost position which is going to be acceptable and achievable for producers. So I think some of those will be harder to tackle as well. And obviously industries that reach into extended supply chains and smallholder farmers and smallholder manufacturers you'll find it very hard just to get the data and transparency that can help show whether you're on track to commit this or not.
Yeah, I mean, still is definitely not an easy one. Here's a question. It's really interesting. Like, how do luxury brands stand out when sustainability is such a widely acknowledged and adopted priority for all brands down to mass market?
Yeah. So how brands stand out is by being very clear on what I said is the base notes versus high notes. And what brands that stand out in the minds of their consumers, the brands that stand out mostly focus on one topic. And so they'll focus on the naturalness of their ingredients, or they'll focus on the supply chain relations and your buying and sourcing, fair living income or what have you, or they'll focus on fantastic material use. And they'll be doing lots of things, but they don't talk about all of it to their consumers. They talk about one thing. And if you think about something like Dove, which is one of Unilever's sustainable living brands, obviously, because they're part of Unilever, they're doing loads of work on plastics and carbon and packaging and all of that. But what they talk to their consumers about is female confidence. And that's why they're known as a brand that cares about more than themselves, that cares about the community, et cetera, because they're focusing on that one thing. And so I guess that would be my advice or guidance is, what's your high note for your brand? And if you're a company that has multiple brands, each one of your brands may have a different high note. You're going to have a lot of base notes that you're building as a company that they can kind of spike off of, but every brand has to find out what's special to itself and its DNA that can contribute something to the world and their consumers that's more than just a kind of me.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, Unilever has called it the social and environmental mission. And I must add what you just said, Jenny, that this needs to be underpinned by facts. Because a lot of brands talk about, okay, this is what we aim to do, but then it's something that has no follow through according to the products. And also it is not underpinned by facts and then becomes greenwashing. So it's absolutely massively important that is actually truly part of the brand DNA, which is something that you mentioned in your conversation. This is also a very interesting question, which is, are non-publicly traded companies pledging to do as much as those with investor base?
Yeah, it is a very interesting question. Now, we at Bain spend a lot of time with private equity, and so we see the changes and the focus that you have there. And I will say that it is they're moving quite quickly to try to get to grips with this issue. And the reason for that is because they know that ESG or sustainability will really move the multiple that they can earn when they exit or kind of, whether it's an IPO or on to the next private owner. And so actually for them, it's not like shareholder returns over 20 years and we'll see if we get to 2050. It's like in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, I got to sell this business, and this business needs to have not just a story, but actually a credible story that people believe and find inspiring, or I'm going to find that actually all of my investments in in helping build the business successfully are not going to be as recognized. And so that's not, private equity is only part of the privately held space. You do see other privately held companies, the likes of Mars, for example, that can make very big progress in claims, because actually they can take a longer term view than some of the publicly traded ones. Now, that's not going to be true for all privately held companies, but certainly those that there's certainly actually some benefits to being privately held if you're really embracing this agenda.
Thank you, Jenny. I mean, I don't know how, but we have reached to the end of our conversation. We always, every time that we talk, it's always the same. It's like, I wish we had more time. This is not different now. So my last, before actually thanking you to be part of today and to make this conversation possible, can you give us your last thought? What is the one thing that we need to remember to start 2022 in the right way?
The thing that I hear time and again from leaders on this journey is that while the first steps were hard, it got a lot easier once you got going, because you just start to learn how to think differently and how to do things differently, and the benefits and power of this. And so whether it's the first step for you on the journey or the first next step to try to do more faster and really deliver, just take that step, because it's going to get easier once you've done that. And so that would be my my parting wish and my parting thoughts for this session.
Well, I mean, Jenny, once again, thank you so much for your passion, for your brain power, and from your great positive energy into this conversation, and for giving us, all of us, the time to share your thoughts with us all. So without further ado, I'd like to pass this on to Claudia, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Diana. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you have any questions or feedback, please email us at hello@positiveluxury.com. We want to hear from you. We'll be back in Jan with a new series, a new webinar series. So until then, please take care and stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.